Hi folks, many people are looking for evidence of God these days, and when they don't find that evidence they then treat the very thought of God as being just a sick joke. I believe it was Yuri Gagarin that came back from space and said, well, I never saw God out there. What a silly thing to say really when you work it out. I've been to Buckingham Palace many times. I've never seen the Queen there yet, and yet I'm assured that she was there, but I just never saw her, that's all. Okay, signs. Where do we look for signs? Is there any evidence of God? Well, I believe there is plenty of evidence for God, but where do we look? Well, I want to tell you, we look in the Bible, because that's where all the evidence is. And yet many people dismiss the Bible as a funny story, obscene to some people, but they don't ever look in the one place where there is an abundance of evidence. Evidence is what we all are looking for. I want to read a scripture to you right now. It says here in Matthew chapter 16, beginning at verse 1, that the Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus. They were kind of the atheists of their day, really. They came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today, it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the sign of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. So what is the sign of Jonah? Well, of course, we all know the story, which many treat as a fairy story, that Jonah was cast into the ocean, swallowed by a great fish, and spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, and then was spewed out and went and did what he should have done in the first place. And disobedience to that is what caused him to be in the belly of the fish in the first place. So Jesus here is talking about his death, that he would be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And this is the sign that Jesus is saying will be given to them. And on the 3rd day he would rise from the dead. So right now I want to look at a few signs that we find right here in the Bible. Ample signs, an abundance, a bounteous supply of signs, and I want to just look at some of them right now. Okay, first of all I want to look at the signs that were given in the book of the prophets about the coming Messiah. So these are the signs of Jesus himself. And we begin with his birthplace. It was written in the prophets that he would be born in Bethlehem. Now that's hardly something he could engineer when he was a little baby, is it? But that's what the prophets said, or the place where the prophets stated he would be born. And he was born in Bethlehem, in Judea. The prophets said that he would have to take flight into Egypt because of some impending disaster. And this was the time when Herod, of course, got wind of the birth of the Messiah, decided to kill all babies in that region and around that age. And so it actually happened. He had to flee into Egypt. Again, that's something he could hardly engineer. He was just a little baby. His father decided to take him down there. And then there's the sign of the return to Nazareth. Again, this is something he would not engineer himself. His father would make that decision, and they returned to Nazareth, and he was brought up in Nazareth. All written about in the prophets. And then his miracle ministry. The prophets wrote abundantly about the kind of ministry that he would have. And indeed Jesus performed exactly what was written in the prophets, with signs and wonders following his preaching. And then it was also written in the prophets that at some point he would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver by a friend. Can you all see that? By a friend. It was written of in the prophets. It happened exactly that way. And then, of course, the method of death on a tree. A cross actually does come from a tree, just in case you didn't know. Sorry to offend your intelligence there, but it was written that he would die on a tree, and he died on a cross. So all these signs, and many more, I've only mentioned a few of them, what I think are the most important ones. All these signs were given by the prophets hundreds of years before Jesus, the human being, set foot on this earth. And so if we're looking for evidence, it's no use looking through a telescope up in the sky. Look down here on earth, historical facts, right there in the Bible. The prophets said all these things would happen. And I guess I've already discussed the odds against him being able to fulfill all of these prophecies. I mean, it was also written that he would ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. Well, that is something he could well engineer. So I haven't really put that in, because he could have easily engineered that. In fact, he did engineer that. But he did know that the prophets said that he would do that. And so that's what he did. So these are some of the signs about the life of Jesus Christ himself, and abundance of evidence. There is a wonderful book out, I would recommend it to everybody. It's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and it's written by a man called Josh McDowell, and I would recommend everybody buys that book. I once gave a copy of that when I worked as a prison chaplain. I gave a copy of that book to a youngish bank robber. This guy was no opportunist. This guy was a gangster. He worked for the big firms down in London as a bank robber. And when he came into prison, he got a lot of time on his hands. He was given a sentence of 11 years. And he started making some inquiries from me. What is life all about, John, he used to say. And I gave him this book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And I'll tell you, it's a big, thick book. It takes a lot of getting through. But I said to him, you've got 11 years to work your way through this. And within 3 months, that guy was converted. He said, I never knew. I mean, he knows something about evidence. It'd just been through a court. Everything had been brought out into the open. He knows something about what we call historical evidence, witnesses and things like that. He became a Christian after 3 months, turned our prison upside down as a result of finding Christ. He didn't just find evidence of Christ, he experienced Christ. And this is what it's all about. Christ is to be experienced. And he experienced Christ. And it changed his whole life. And he, in turn, changed our prison, every prison that he went to subsequently when he left us. This is the evidence, folks. And as I say again, get Josh McDowell's book. It's well worth the read. Okay, now there are also some more signs written about in the Bible that are of particular interest to our generation. And these are signs for our generation. I hope you can see that. Signs for our generation. The big one, of course, is Israel. Now, the prophet said that the whole of Israel would be dispersed throughout the four corners of the earth, north, south, east and west. And of course, when these prophecies were given, Israel was really living in relative success. They were doing well for themselves, thank you very much. There was no reason at all for this to happen. And of course they rejected the words of the prophets and laughed at them and stoned them, imprisoned them and treated them very cruelly, because they said this could never happen. We are the chosen people of God. How can this happen to us? And yet in AD 70, the Roman general Titus marched against Jerusalem and began the dispersion to the four corners of the earth for the Jewish nation, north, south, east and west. And of course we have seen this. Historically we know it's happened back in AD 70, but our generation has actually seen it with our own eyes. But then the prophets, hundreds of years before the event, over 2,000 years before the event, talked about the regathering of Israel, that God said, I would bring them back. I will not reject you, I will still love you, I'm just punishing you because you've totally rejected me. You've turned to idol worship, you've rejected the God who's breathed life into you and who rescued you from Egypt and brought you back to the land of Canaan, and you've totally rejected me. You've become corrupt, you've become wicked, you've turned to idols, and so on and so forth. And so he said, this is the reason for the dispersion. It wasn't because he's a horrible God, it's because they were a horrible people. Okay, but he said that, but even so, I won't reject you. I will still love you and I will bring you back. And this, of course, happened, certainly in my generation. In 1948, the State of Israel was declared. The prophets also said that there would come a time, and that time is now. We're beginning to see it now. We haven't seen it previously. Since 1948 up to now, we've seen small groups, small nations that have not liked Israel or the existence of Israel. But now we're seeing an international revulsion, rejection and betrayal of the Jewish people. Even the United States of America have been Israel's friends for, what, 60 years is it now? And now the United States themselves are turning against Israel. The previous President Bush began to turn against them, and now President Obama. And this was all mentioned in the prophets, that it would happen. Seemed very unlikely until the last, 10, 20 years, that there would be an international revulsion, international rejection, an international betrayal of Israel. And we're seeing that happen right now. Sometime this year, of course, they want to create a Palestinian state, and give, I believe it's East Jerusalem to the Palestinian state, which will make it very impossible for the Jews to live. I mean, there was a case in the paper the other day. Some young Jew came out of a restaurant, a nightclub or something, turned the wrong way, got into an Arab quarter and finished up half killed. So how are they going to survive together? How are they going to coexist together? It's an impossibility. And surely the leaders of this world should know this. Well, I wonder about that. But anyway, and also the prophets prophesied, and I would advise anyone to read the book of Daniel, fantastic book. I just read it yesterday myself. That one world government would eventually arise on this earth. Now, okay, folks, if you read your newspapers, if you watch the news on the television, you will obviously know that this is the aim of the leaders of this world, to create a kind of a one world government. Already we see it in Europe, where Europe is fast becoming a one world government, and look at the mess it's causing. Greece is bankrupt, Spain is on the way, Portugal is on the way, but they will try and maintain this one world Europe, one European Union, United States of Europe. They will try and maintain it, and it will spread out and it will grow until eventually we will end up with a one world government. But all this was predicted or prophesied in the prophets, the signs for our generation by the prophets. Okay, so what do we conclude from all this? A good study of the prophets might be good for all of us. I was in Crete not so long ago, and I was talking to some Israelis and about the prophecies, and they were looking at me kind of blank, and I said to them, don't you read the prophets? Don't you study the prophets? All the evidence is there. All the questions you are asking me is right there in the prophets. Why don't you read your own prophets? But it's the same for us Gentiles. We need to read the prophets, because all the evidence, all the signs that we really want to find out about God are right there in the prophets. Very valuable part of the books in the Bible, because they speak of the Christ to come, the Messiah to come. They spoke of his rejection and betrayal. They spoke about his resurrection, his ascension to heaven, but they also said that he would come back again. After a long period of time, Jesus himself said it will be a long period of time, and so far it's been 2,000 years, but he will come back. Why? Because it was prophesied. And God always fulfills his word. And to our generation, we have this evidence of Israel before our eyes, after being rejected, sent to the far corners of the earth. They have now been regathered, are now a nation of Israel again, and now we're beginning to see the rejection of them, the revulsion that the world has towards Israel, the only democratic country in the Middle East, and we betray them, and we are betraying them. But all this, or all these things, are a sign to us, in many cases, an unbelieving generation. We can read the sky. I can tell you when it's going to rain. I can see the clouds coming over. But can I read the sign of the times? And it's the sign of the times that really is the evidence God has given to us. So stop looking through your telescope. You're never going to see God. Don't bother going to space in the spacecraft looking for God. You're not going to find him out there. Look in the Bible. The Bible has got all the evidence you'll need. And don't forget also the book I mentioned by Joshua McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Well worth the reading. It is a bit big. There's a brand new version of it out right now, but it's well worth reading. God bless you, folks. Seek and keep on seeking, and you shall find. Ask, keep on asking, and it will be given to you. Knock, keep on knocking, and the door will be opened. It's up to us, folks. We have the responsibility to ask, seek, and knock. God bless you. Bye for now.